Have you ever looked at a harmless, trembling old man and thought, I could probably knock him over with a sneeze? It's a natural instinct. Biology tells us that big muscles mean danger and gray hair means weakness. But what happens when that biology is wrong? What happens when the trembling isn't fear, but a rhythm? And what happens when the man you're trying to crush is a band legend who turned stumbling into the deadliest weapon on earth? Welcome back to Tales of Wonder. If you enjoy stories where the underdog doesn't just bark but bites back with style, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. We post the stories the algorithm is afraid to show you. Now let's begin today's story. The Grand Elysium Hotel was the kind of place where the air conditioning smelled like money. It was a glass and steel monolith in the center of the city, a playground for crypto billionaires, heiresses, and politicians who needed to launder their reputations. In a place like this, appearance was everything. If you weren't wearing Italian silk or carrying a designer bag worth more than a mid-sized sedan, you were invisible. Artie Penhaligon was the definition of invisible. At 72 years old, Artie was a whisper of a man. He stood about 5'5" if he really stretched his spine, but usually he was hunched over a mop or a broom. His uniform, a dull, gray maintenance jumpsuit, hung off his skeletal frame like laundry on a wire line. He had a shock of white, frizzy hair that made him look like a startled dandelion, and he walked with a perpetual, rhythmic wobble. To the guests, Artie was just part of the furniture. He was the guy who polished the brass railings at 3 a.m. He was the guy who swept the cigarette butts off the patio. He was the guy who always seemed to have a slight smell of antiseptic and, was that peppermint schnapps? Technically, Artie wasn't supposed to drink on the job, but the management, specifically the head of housekeeping, Mrs. Higgins, looked the other way. Why? Because Artie was cheap, he never complained, and despite his constant wobbling, the floors he polished were immaculate. He moved with a strange, fluid inefficiency that somehow got the job done. But today, the ecosystem of the Grand Elysium was about to be disrupted. Enter Julian Vance. Julian was 24, worth $300 million thanks to an app that did something vague with NFTs, and he was currently the most annoying person on the West Coast. He didn't walk into the hotel lobby. He invaded it. He was flanked by an entourage of sycophants holding cameras, live streaming his arrival to 3 million followers. And right beside him, casting a shadow that seemed to swallow the reception desk, was Brock. Brock was Julian's head of security. He was a slab of meat carved into the vague shape of a human. Standing 6'6" and weighing nearly 300 pounds of steroid-enhanced aggression, Brock didn't just wear a suit. The suit was holding on for dear life. He wore sunglasses indoors, had an earpiece that he tapped importantly every 30 seconds, and treated everyone who wasn't Julian like a biological error. The conflict began with something incredibly small. A leaf. Artie was in the lobby, sweeping up a few stray autumn leaves that had blown in through the revolving doors. He was humming to himself, his body swaying slightly, a small, silver flask tucked into his chest pocket. He wasn't drunk, at least not in the way people usually mean, but he was loose. As Julian's entourage swept through, Brock took the lead, shoving guests out of the way with his forearm. Make a hole, VIP coming through. Back up, Artie, focused on a particularly stubborn oak leaf, didn't hear the commotion. He swept his broom in a wide arc, and the bristles gently brushed across the toe of Brock's $3,000 custom leather Oxfords. The lobby went silent. Brock stopped. He looked down at his shoe. A single speck of dust sat on the polished leather. He looked up at Artie. You, Brock grunted, his voice sounding like gravel in a blender. You just ruined my shine. Artie blinked, looking up through thick, smudged glasses. He smiled with a toothy, harmless grin. Oh, terribly sorry, big fella. The leaves, you know, they're tricky little devils. Let me just... Artie reached in his pocket, pulled out a rag that looked older than the hotel itself, and leaned forward to wipe the shoe. Don't touch me, Brock roared, kicking Artie's hand away. Artie stumbled back, his legs crossing over each other comically. He flailed his arms, looking like a scarecrow caught in a hurricane, before miraculously regaining his balance without falling. Whoa there, Artie chuckled, taking a quick, subtle sip from his flask while Brock was distracted. Strong legs. Very sturdy. Good for lifting heavy boxes. The insult flew right over Brock's head, but the disrespect didn't. Julian Vance, sensing content, whipped his phone around. Yo, chat. Look at this. My boy Brock is about to handle this disrespect. The service here is trash, guys. Trash. Brock puffed out his chest. Get out of my face, old man, before I mop the floor with you. Artie looked at his mop, then at Brock, then back at his mop. Well, I usually use the bucket for that, but to each his own. Brock stepped forward, his hand balling into a fist the size of a honey-baked ham. Security from the hotel started to rush over, but Julian held up a hand. Wait, let it play out. I want to see Brock earn his paycheck. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. A 300-pound killing machine versus a 70-year-old janitor who looked like a strong breeze would snap him in half. It was the perfect setup for a tragedy, or so everyone thought. The confrontation in the lobby didn't turn into a fight, yet. Mrs. Higgins, the head of housekeeping, rushed in and pulled Artie away, apologizing profusely to Julian and Brock. Artie was banished to the back gardens, told to stay out of sight, until the VIP guests checked out. You know better, Artie. Mrs. Higgins scolded him in the break room. That man is dangerous. I heard he put a paparazzo in the hospital last week for taking a picture of Julian eating a taco. Artie took a long, contemplative sip from his flask. Dangerous? He mused, his voice raspy. He's stiff, Mrs. H. Too much muscle. Moves like a tractor. Tractors are only dangerous if you stand in front of them and wait. Just stay in the garden, she sighed. But fate and Julian Vance's ego had other plans. That evening, the Grand Elysium was hosting the Gala of the Future, a black tie event Julian was sponsoring. The hotel's massive rear courtyard, a lush garden with fountains and marble statues, was transformed into a party zone. Champagne flowed like water, and the music was a thumping bass that rattled the windows. Artie was in the shadows of the garden, pruning rose bushes. He was happy there. He had his flask, he had his roses, and he had the rhythmic swaying of the trees to keep him company. However, the party began to drift outward. Julian, drunk on expensive champagne and his own hype, decided the main dance floor was too crowded. He led his entourage, including the ever-stoic Brock, into the darker, quieter part of the garden, Artie's domain. This is where the real magic happens, babe. Julian shouted to a model hanging on his arm. He lit a cigar, despite the no smoking signs posted everywhere. Artie, seeing the smoke near his prize-winning petunias, sighed. He clipped his shears onto his belt and wobbled out of the shadows. Excuse me, Artie said, his voice soft. Young sir, no smoke near the flowers. The petals, they have sensitive lungs. Julian spun around, squinting. It's the janitor again. Brock, look, it's your nemesis. Brock, who had been brooding by a statue, turned slowly. He had been stewing over the lobby incident all day. He felt foolish for not having intimidated the old man instantly. His reputation as the Wall was based on fear, and Artie hadn't shown any. You again, Brock growled. I thought I told you to disappear. I did, Artie said, swaying slightly to the left. But you found me. It's like hide and seek, but you're very loud seekers. Julian laughed. He's roasting you, Brock. Are you going to take that from a guy who smells like a distillery? Brock cracked his knuckles. The sound was like gunshots in the quiet garden. Get lost, old man. Now, just put out the cigar, Artie said, gesturing loosely. And I vanished like poof. Brock walked up to Artie. This time, there were no witnesses except Julian's inner circle. No cameras, or so Brock thought. No hotel management. Just a dark garden. Brock reached out and shoved Artie. Hard. It was a shove that would have sent a normal man flying into the rose bushes. But Artie didn't fly. As Brock's hand made contact, Artie's body went limp, rotating with the force of the push. He spun around 360 degrees, stumbling, wobbling, and somehow ended up standing right next to Brock, leaning against him for support. Whoa, turbulence, Artie muttered, resting his elbow on Brock's massive bicep. Brock recoiled as if he'd been touched by plague. Get off me. He swung a backhand at Artie's head. It was a lazy strike, but it had enough power to knock someone unconscious. Artie's knees seemed to give out at that exact moment. He dropped straight down, as if he were fainting, and Brock's fist whizzed through the empty air where Artie's head had been a millisecond before. Artie caught himself on his hands and knees, looked at a weed on the ground, and plucked it. "Missed a spot," he mumbled. The entourage went silent. Julian's eyes went wide. Did he just dodge that? He fell. Brock snarled, his face turning red. "He's drunk." He fell over. "I tripped," Artie agreed, standing up shakily. He dusted off his knees. "Very slippery grass. You should be careful, big fella. Gravity is a harsh mistress." Brock was furious now. His professional pride was on the line. "You think this is funny? You think you're tough." "Tough?" Artie blinked. "Oh, heavens no. I'm fragile, like a porcelain vase. Please don't break me." "Brock," Julian whispered, a cruel smile forming. "I'll give you 10 grand if you knock him out. Right now. One punch." Brock smiled. "Easy money." He stepped into a combat stance, legs wide, fists up, chin tucked. He looked like a tank preparing to crush a bicycle. "Last chance to run, Gramps," Brock warned. Artie sighed. He unscrewed his flask, took a long, deliberate swig, and wiped his mouth with his sleeve. His eyes, usually cloudy, suddenly gleamed with a sharp, cold clarity that vanished as quickly as it appeared. "I don't run," Artie said, his voice dropping an octave. "Running spills the drink." Brock lunged. It was a standard jab-cross combination, executed with the speed of a trained fighter. The jab was meant to stun, the cross to finish. Artie didn't block. He didn't retreat. He simply melted. As the jab came, Artie swayed backward, his spine bending an impossible angle, like a reed in the wind. The fist grazed his nose hairs. As the cross came thundering in, Artie pivoted on one heel, his body spiraling away. He looked like he was losing his balance, his arms flailing wildly. One of those flailing arms, holding the heavy metal flask, accidentally on purpose swung around and cracked against Brock's funny bone. "Gah!" Brock yelped, his arm going numb. "Oops!" Artie cried out, stumbling past him. "Saw the slippery shoes." Brock turned, enraged. He unleashed a flurry of hooks. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Artie was everywhere and nowhere. He bobbed, he weaved, he stumbled. He looked like a man trying to walk on the deck of a ship in a hurricane. Every time Brock thought he had a clean shot, Artie would trip and his head would drop out of the strike zone. At one point, Brock threw a massive overhand right. Artie hiccuped and fell backward, catching himself on his hands in a crab walk position. Brock's fist smashed into the stone statue behind Artie, cracking the plaster. While Brock howled in pain, clutching his hand, Artie kicked his legs up, seemingly struggling to get up, and his heels caught Brock right under the chin. Brock's teeth slammed together. He stumbled back, dazed. "This grass is terrible," Artie complained, finally standing up and brushing dirt off his jumpsuit. "I should speak to the groundskeeper." "Oh wait, that's me." Julian was live-streaming now. "World star. The janitor is eating him alive." "Brock, you look like an idiot." The humiliation was fueling Brock's adrenaline, but it was also making him sloppy. He roared, a primal sound of frustration, and charged Artie like a linebacker. He was going to tackle the old man and crush him with sheer weight. Artie watched the charging giant. He didn't move. He waited. 10 feet, 5 feet, 2 feet. At the very last second, Artie dropped to his knees and slid forward on the slick grass, right between Brock's legs. As he slid, he grabbed the hem of Brock's trousers and yanked hard. Physics took over. Brock's upper body kept moving forward at full speed, but his ankles were suddenly anchored. Brock flew. He sailed through the air with the grace of a thrown brick, crashing face first into the ornamental fountain. Water sprayed everywhere. The music seemed to stop. The guests who had gathered on the balcony gasped. Artie stood up slowly from his slide. He capped his flask. "A bath," he nodded sagely. "Good idea." "You looked sweaty." Brock emerged from the fountain, sputtering, soaking wet, and looking like a swamp monster. He wasn't just beaten, he was destroyed. His suit was ruined, his dignity was gone, and he had been bested by a geriatric janitor who barely seemed to know where he was. Brock reached for his ankle holster. He pulled out a collapsible steel baton. "That's it," Brock screamed, water dripping from his nose. "No more games. I'm going to break every bone in your body." The crowd gasped. This had gone from funny to dangerous. Julian stopped laughing. "Whoa, Brock, chill. Put the stick away." But Brock was past reason. He charged, swinging the steel baton with lethal intent. This wasn't a fight anymore. It was an assault. Artie didn't stumble this time. He stood perfectly still. His posture changed. The hunch in his back vanished. His shoulders squared. The drunk glaze over his eyes evaporated, replaced by the focus of a surgeon. As Brock swung the baton down at Artie's skull, Artie stepped into the swing. It happened so fast the camera barely caught it. Artie's left hand shot up, catching Brock's wrist mid-swing. He didn't just block it. He redirected the force. With his right hand, Artie delivered a single, precise palm strike to Brock's solar plexus. It wasn't a heavy hit. It was a vibration, a shockwave. Brock's eyes bulged. The baton clattered to the ground. He made a sound like a deflating balloon and crumpled to his knees, gasping for air that wouldn't come. Artie didn't stop there. He seamlessly transitioned back into his drunk persona, grabbing Brock's shoulder as if to steady himself. "Oh dear," Artie said loud enough for the crowd to hear. "He's had too much to drink." Knees weak, palms sweaty. Suddenly, a voice boomed from the balcony. "Enough." It was the general manager of the hotel, Mr. Sterling, no relation to Brock. Beside him stood an elderly Japanese man in a bespoke tuxedo, Mr. Tanaka, the owner of the hotel chain. Mr. Tanaka looked down at Artie, a spark of recognition in his eyes. He slowly began to clap. "The shifting sand," Mr. Tanaka said, his voice carrying over the silent garden. "I have not seen that style since the underground circuit in Macau 30 years ago." Julian looked up, confused. "Macau? What are you talking about?" Mr. Tanaka walked down the stairs, his eyes fixed on Artie. "You all see a janitor. I see Arthur Penhaligon. In the fighting pits, they called him the Wobbler. He was banned from professional competition in 1995. Why?" Julian asked, pointing at the gasping Brock. "Was he too brutal?" "No," Mr. Tanaka smiled. "Because he was bad for business. People bet on blood. They bet on knockouts. Arthur never drew blood. He never bruised his opponents. He simply humiliated them. He made grandmasters trip over their own feet. He made heavyweight champions punch walls. He turned violence into a comedy routine. The gambling syndicates lost millions because no one could land hit on him. So, they banned him for making a mockery of the sport." Mr. Tanaka stopped in front of Artie. "I thought you were dead, Arthur." Artie shrugged, taking a sip from his flask. "Retirement is nice. Good benefits here. Dental is okay." Brock was finally getting his breath back. He tried to stand up, humiliated and furious. He cheated. He's got a weapon." "The only weapon here is your stupidity," Mr. Tanaka said coldly. "You attacked a member of my staff. You brandished a weapon in my hotel. And you ruined my fountain." Brock looked to Julian for support. "Boss." Julian, realizing which way the wind was blowing, and seeing the millions of likes pouring in for Artie on the live stream, shrugged. "Sorry, Brock. You got dropped by Grandpa. It's bad for the brand. You're fired." Brock stood there, dripping wet, defeated by a man half his size and twice his age. "Get him out of here," Mr. Tanaka ordered the hotel security. As two guards escorted the soaking wet, limping giant out of the garden, Artie picked up his broom. He looked at the crowd of wealthy elites staring at him in awe. "Show's over," Artie mumbled. "Please don't step on the petunias on your way out." Julian rushed up to Artie, phone in hand. Artie, can we get a selfie? You're going viral, man. The Wobbler. We can make merch. I'll be your agent." Artie looked at the phone, then at Julian. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a slightly crumpled wet floor sign, and placed it gently in front of Julian. "Careful," Artie said. "Slippery slope." He turned and wobbled away into the darkness of the garden, humming his tune, leaving the billionaire standing there with a yellow plastic sign. Later that night, in the break room, Mrs. Higgins was sitting with Artie. The adrenaline had faded, and the hotel was quiet. You know you can't keep this job now, Artie, she said softly. Everyone knows who you are. The press is outside. I know, Artie sighed. Time to move on. Maybe a library this time. Quiet. No heavy lifting. Mrs. Higgins eyed the silver flask on the table. You know, for 30 years I've ignored that thing. But now that you're leaving, can I have a sip? It's been a long night. Artie smiled and slid the flask across the table. Be my guest, Mrs. H. But warn you it's strong stuff. Mrs. Higgins unscrewed the cap. She braced herself for the burn of cheap whiskey or moonshine. She tilted her head back and took a massive swig. She paused. She swished it around in her mouth. She swallowed. She looked at Artie with wide eyes. Water, she whispered. It's ice water? Artie winked. Hydration is key, Mrs. H. Especially when you have vertigo. Keeps the dizziness away. Vertigo? She stared at him. You mean the stumbling, the wobbling? Inner ear infection in '88. Never healed right. Artie tapped his ear. I don't use the drunken style because I'm a master, Mrs. H. I use it because if I try to stand still, I fall over. I just learned to fall in the right direction. He stood up, grabbed his bag, and wobbled toward the door. Wait, Mrs. Higgins stammered. So, you beat a 300-pound bodyguard while completely sober and suffering from vertigo? Artie paused at the doorframe, the silhouette of a scrawny old man against the hallway light. Balance isn't about standing straight, he said. It's about knowing exactly when to let the world spin without you. And with that, the deadliest fighter in the world stumbled out into the night. So, here is a question for you to chew on. If you had a hidden skill that you were the best in the world at, but you were banned from using it publicly, would you keep it a secret for 30 years like Artie? Or would you have shown off long ago? Let me know in the comments below. If Artie's humble takedown of the bully brought a smile to your face, please stumble on over to that like button and give it a tap. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about hidden legends and instant karma. Until next time, remember, sometimes the person shaking isn't afraid, they're just warming up. See you in the next video.